Hello and welcome to Bright Wings, children's books to make the heart soar. I am your host, Charity Hill. The purpose of this conversation is to help mothers and fathers identify books that will liberate their children to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. We are considering the merits of Wildwood, a 541-page book by Colin Meloy and illustrated by his wife, Carson Ellis. Wildwood is the first in a trilogy of books of similar length. In order to help you know whether Wildwood is a book worth reading, I'll tell you a bit of its plot structure, and then I will share with you some of its values and some of its demerits. I do use spoilers. Now, this is because I want you to be fully informed so you can make an informed decision about what is really going on in this book and whether it's going to be good for your child or not. Let me begin by saying I picked up Wildwood. In fact, I ordered it as a Christmas gift for my eldest daughter. I picked up Wildwood because I saw a glowing review by Trenton Lee Stewart for it. And I love Trenton Lee Stewart. Pretty much everything he's written for middle grade I have read. I got to work up the courage to ask him for an interview. What's the worst he can say, right? Stewart's review reads, Wildwood is an irresistible atmospheric adventure, richly imagined and richly rewarding. At the time of recording this podcast, I discovered that Carson Ellis is actually also the illustrator for Trenton Lee Stewart's books. So there's a predisposition towards friendliness between Stewart and the Meloy-Ellis team. All right, so Wildwood. Wildwood is the story of Prue McKeel, a 7th grade girl who's looking after her brother, when suddenly he's kidnapped by a giant flock of extra-large crows. She follows the flock and is followed by Curtis Melberg, a 7th grade boy, across the river from her town and into the impassable wilderness. At a dangerous and rather crucial moment, Prue and Curtis are separated and have distinct, dangerous adventures. But both of them finally discover that the witch of the woods has kidnapped baby Mac to make of him a blood sacrifice to the ivy of the woods. The ivy will then become the Witch Queen's all-powerful servant. My friends, despite how much I wanted to like this book because of Trenton Lee Stewart, and despite how dramatically and adventurously I've described the plotline of this book, the shocking truth is that I'm bored. Bored! It takes a lot to bore me. I'm on page 422, and they're about ready to set out to go save baby Mac. And I haven't finished the book. It's been several weeks, and I don't care if I do. Gasp. But I thought 422 pages was definitely enough to give you a taste of what I'm reading. So let me tell you. You know how it's possible to be both bored and exhausted? That's kind of how I feel reading it. Why tired? Well, there's no rest in the book in the sense that there's no consistent world. What is really going on, and who is reliable? Prue and Curtis come from the regular world, but when they cross the river, everything's different. There's a whole nother world, the impassable wilderness, with its talking creatures and its magic, and it's nestled like a nesting doll right inside our world. These two worlds remain exterior to each other, but they kind of impinge upon one another. This is different, right, from a fairy tale, because inside a fairy tale, the claims of the fairy tale is that it is the real world. Well, oh my. Well, maybe that means the author is then if the author is trying to do the same thing as a fairy tale, maybe Meloy is claiming that what happens in the Wildwood, what happens in the impassable wilderness, is just like what happens out here. Perhaps this is what Meloy is claiming. But let me return to this idea that there is consistent uncertainty. Who is good and who is bad is very gray. The morality is very situation dependent. Different groups of forest creatures are at odds with each other over misunderstandings mostly, but have some basis in grabs for power. Right? One of the basic frameworks for operating in the world is a sense of justice. And what is just is unclear, and not just because you've been thrown into the middle of the story. The author intends it. Even the most clearly evil character, the Witch Queen, her evil, we could imagine, we could surmise, is based on a grief that she suffers before the circumstances of the book. How she handles her grief is really a choice that precipitates her necromonious grab for power. Now, the main character, Prue, is basically utterly alone with her brother when he's kidnapped. And being alone, being solitary, seems to characterize Prue. Frankly, I think I'm not inclined to like her. I'm not sure if you can trust her viewpoint. For most of the story, you become sympathetic to her because you're reading tons of pages and because you might sympathize with her responsibility or you might sympathize with her misfortune in some way. But it's only her circumstances that commend her to us. We're not sure within the forest also, as I kind of said a moment ago, who to trust, who is good, what's worth fighting for. The author intends us to be a little confused by the political situation in the Wildwood. Whose claims are the just ones? Maybe the author wants us to experience his idea that goodness and evil can be largely situational. Bad choices can really be understood as you're reacting to a particular circumstance and therefore really aren't to blame, or you're responding under limited information, or you're responding under false information. For example, Curtis makes some very problematic decisions and takes some very problematic actions when he thinks that the Witch Queen is good. And some mention is made that he thinks about what happened a bit, but there's no long-term consequences. Now, at some point, Prue gets out of the woods. She gets home and wants help from her parents, but discovers that their choices have helped to concoct the terrible rise to power of the witch. More than anything, they wanted to have a family. Quote, but in order to have children, they had to make a deal with an evil queen who lived in a faraway wood. The deal was that in time, the evil queen would come for the second child, the little boy, and would take him with her into the forest kingdom. End quote. They were willing to make a deal, so to speak, with the devil here, and in order to conceive her, and they don't really believe that they'll have a second child. And so their brother's life becomes a commodity that's promised and then traded in a dreadful exchange. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with parents making mistakes in books. That's very healthy, can be very healthy. The problem is that Prue's parents tell her not to go back. They tell her to stay where she is, and they are not going to go and rescue Mac. They remain passive when confronted with the consequences of what they've done. So passive that they don't stop Prue from going back to the impassable wilderness. So Prue goes back to the impassable wilderness to rally what help she can. She goes to a portion of the forest that is sort of the most meaningful part of the forest. It's kind of well-ordered. The animals and people there are cheerful and well-ordered. They have their work, and they're not warlike people. There's kind of a holy tree which is connected to all the life in the forest. And there's a group of religious who learn to meditate and commune with the tree and with the life in the forest. And they are the decision makers for their community. Due to the advice of the leader of this religious community, the people of the Northwood agree to oppose the Witch Queen. So most of the creatures agree to help her save her brother. But what's so crazy to me is they don't go into this to save her brother for his sake, but for some further self-protecting, self-advancing good. The author tries to make the point that, using the metaphor of the tree, right, that all lives are connected in perhaps a druidic or a world soul sort of type idea, that all life is one. So if the boy is sacrificed to the ivy, life will be unbalanced. Life will be terrible. The ivy will choke and destroy. And so that brings things out of balance, right? And certainly it's good to have a representation in a story about how another's pain and suffering impacts me. But that seems to be the basis of the decision-making for the people of the Northwood, for most of the soldiers, of the common people joining in opposing the Witch Queen. And the self-interest is what motivates these complacent, contented people to bestir themselves. It oddly reminds me of Adam Smith's economic theories. Motivation is selfish. It's largely self-referential. And when you take it to its logical conclusion, they're saving baby Mac because it's useful to them. But don't get me wrong. I don't mind complexity. I love complexity. I love nuance. I love moral complexity. This is one of the reasons why I adore Trenton Lee Stewart's writing. He does that so well. But moral complexity is far different than relativism. Now, does baby Mac get saved? I'm guessing he does. That's not a spoiler. I just know that they've got to save baby Mac. And I know that there are 2 more books in the series. So, yeah. But has Wildwood caused me to care enough about Prue and Curtis and the creatures of the forest and their political situation? Has it caused me to care enough about them that I want to read 100 more pages and find out how that happens? Not really. The way that evil and good are so situational in this book can actually detract from the drama, the hard edges of pushing through action and making deliberate choices, knowing what you're doing and knowing why you're choosing it. And therefore, I feel like there's not a lot of character development because characters only sort of learn more facts, but I don't see them growing personally because they're not very aware of what their choices are. And their choices are, frankly, somewhat hazy. A very short way of saying that is that for an adventure book, the choices are hazy and the action is somewhat slow. Now, is this book middle school age appropriate? Totally. And it does, as one reviewer claims, have elements of writing in a more challenging way that make it adult accessible. Is it intended to be an eco-fable and political satire? Yes, I think so. I hope this review of Wildwood, written by Colin Meloy and illustrated by Carson Ellis, published by HarperCollins Children's, has helped you decide whether this book is a book worth reading.